In just a few moments, I'm going to bring someone on the show that I've been kind of, obsessing over or following or just loving to see all of the amazing work that they've done over the past few years. I found this artist during the pandemic in 2020. Right when I started to have the pleasure of working on the Radically Love podcast, and when I started to get more serious about this podcast and this conversation, I'm just so excited for you to hear it. And also it really inspired me and reminded me of the things that I do in my life that I love. And the reason why that I do them, because they bring me joy, and that joy is inherent within me. And Meera speaks to this so eloquently, but I thought I'd do something a little bit different today. I don't often jump in here pre-guest and give you a fun little extra, but today I felt inspired to share a poem from my book, The Dark Moon, a book poetry for Shavasana, which if you haven't read it yet or haven't picked it up yet, it is available on Amazon. I self-published this baby. It's my first work of poetry, and it was co-illustrated by my amazing, talented sister, Megan Benedictus. She drew these phases of the moon. So if you flip through the book, it's like you get to see the phases of the moon change, the waxing, the waning, the full, the new moon. And so the poem, I'm going to read a poem from my book today. And spoiler alert, I just felt inspired to share this because of my conversation with Meera. So here it is, the poem. This is called The Majesty of All There Is. This world is ethereal. It is, if you choose to see it that way. There's so much more beyond the tangible touch, taste, sight, sounds. Sit still and breathe. Breathe past your physical boundary. It is nothing but a mirage, a house to come home to, surely. But if we do not explore outside of our homely shell, why then, how will we ever come to know the majesty, mystery, magic of this deep, vast multiverse that is swirling all around us? So without further ado, here's my conversation with the fantastic, talented, amazing artist, Meera Lee Patel. All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome to Outside the Studio. I'm having a fangirl moment. This is one of my... Meera Lee Patel is like one of my, what's a different word for fangirl? It's like somebody that I aspire to. I've been following her career since 2020. So it's been like 3 years now. And it's just, when I found Meera, I was like, oh my God, this magical unicorn exists in human form. And she's out there in the world creating her art, sharing her wisdom. And the way that she's doing it is just, I love it. I fucking love it. Sorry for the curse word, but I can't be more emphatic about this interview. So just if you haven't heard of Meera, get ready, sit down, ready to have your socks blown off, especially if you are a fan of art and poetry and journaling and all these beautiful, whimsical things that bring us so much joy in life. The cool thing about Meera is, in my opinion, she's a self-taught artist and the author of already several books and best-selling journals. So I love that she mixes these two mediums together. And so some of her books that are already out and journals, My Friend Fear, Create Your Own Calm, that is a journal. Made Out of Stars, and then Start Where You Are, which is another journal. And then the book that's coming out in May is How It Feels to Find Yourself, Navigating Life's Changes with Purpose, Clarity, and Heart. And that's the one that I get to read and talk to her about today. And so if you're just listening, please, please, please go check out this beautiful work online. And then if you get the pleasure of watching us, you get to see it live here in person. Meera, how are you doing today? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to talk with you. Yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, me too. Well, so you probably get this all the time as an artist. But I guess I've been just thinking a lot about, where do artists tap into that creative that I love Elizabeth Gilbert's use of it, the elusive creative genius.
Mhm.
Like where does that creative vision come from within you? How do you find inspiration?
I really think, I am somebody who looks for a formula. I always think that maybe there's a correct path to tapping into creativity or inspiration or making something beautiful. And in my experience, that's never been true. It's always come from showing up and being disciplined and doing the work, even when it doesn't feel good. So for me, inspiration has been not about waiting for it to strike me, but in finding it as part of the doing. So I show up and I write and I draw. And recently I've been really, really immersed in experimentation, which has been really scary because when you're experimenting, you're doing stuff you're not good at. It's your unpracticed eye and hand, and you're just seeing what will happen when you mix different mediums or ideas or thoughts or whatever it is you're working on. Um, but I found that after a year and a half of being open to experimentation and to allowing myself um, to become really close to failure and making a lot of stuff that I don't like, I'm learning how to find inspiration and creativity and kind of those pockets of encouragement in this process.
Mm.
So I guess that's a long way of saying that finding inspiration is kind of training yourself to see it because it is everywhere and it doesn't just strike as an aha moment. A lot of times it's found in the drudgery and in the monotony of practice and doing something over and over again, even when it doesn't feel good.
Yeah. Okay. No, I love this answer because it just speaks to the practicality. I guess what I see is that we really oftentimes, and I do this, we idealize people like you who have this level of success that they've reached. They have this and I mean, I want to dive into your story too, because you did leave a 9 to 5 job and a big city to kind of like jump into this void of the unknown and see if you could make it on your own as an artist. And I think when we see somebody like you show up on the scene and you have this apparent, and I'm using air quotes here, level of success, we often idealize that as, oh, that person got lucky. Oh, they're just naturally talented, which in my opinion, you are. But I mean, we kind of like forget about the brass tacks, the nuts and bolts of
Right.
practically showing up for yourself every day, even when you don't want to, even when maybe you're tired or like right now, almost going to give birth to your second child. And is it okay that I said that?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay, because that's another reason why it's like, I mean, so I'm thinking back to just for everyone out there who's listening, Meera, I'm just so lucky to have found Meera by way of working with Rosie Acosta at Radically Loved on the Radically Loved podcast. And I remember because I get to listen as part of my job, I get to listen to these podcasts before they go live and pick out some like nuggets, pearls of wisdoms, and find some like really salient quotes. And I just remember listening to Meera's first interview with Rosie over and over again. And myself felt so inspired. And where was I going with this? Gosh, I totally lost my train of thought. But I guess you can see that like I'm clearly inspired by the work that Meera does and thinking about here's where I want to go with this. Thinking about the journey that kind of started you on this path, Meera, if you would tell us a little bit about it. And, I mean, now it's been years in the making. I think I heard you say you left Brooklyn in 2017, around
Yeah,
there.
that's right. Yeah. So I had been working full time at a technical publishing company after I graduated college. So that was in my early 20s. And I was there for nearly 8 years. And it was after the first year that I found myself really, really discouraged and kind of, I was having a bit of an existential crisis, I will say, where I was like, I did all of the things that this American life told me to. Like, I went to school, I got decent grades, I went to college, I got 2 degrees, I got the job after college, I did all the internships, and now I'm working. And like, is this it? Is this the rest of my life? And is this what it looks like? And I felt so disenchanted because although I was very grateful to have a steady job and benefits and, many things that a lot of people are not lucky enough to have, I didn't have any meaning in my life. And I do think that without meaning, um, life is a dark place and it's difficult to find purpose or a reason for existing, really. And I started writing and drawing because that is a practice that I've always identified with and that has always made me feel like me. The thing that separates me from being just a cog in a machine. And so I started painting and writing again after hours. And I opened a little shop on Etsy and I got involved in the local like craft fair circuit and started selling like my handmade books and zines and greeting cards and things like that. And that's where I saw whole families, like, partners with children who were making a living selling their wares and their art. And they had homes and they had healthcare and they were living their lives doing something that brought them meaning. And I told myself, you're going to be one of those people. And I started freelancing and working on my art as a business, like taking it seriously while I was working full time. And it took me another 7 years before it was 2017. And I finally worked up the courage to quit. A big catalyst of that was that I had just sold my book, My Friend Fear, to my publisher. And now I had to write it. And it was a book all about fear. And I told myself, how can you tell other people to not let fear corrupt their lives when you're letting it corrupt yours? And so that year, I decided I was going to do all of the things that scared me. And I finally quit my job after almost a decade. And I left Brooklyn and I traveled through the country by myself, something I was really scared to do as a very small woman. Our country is frightening to me now with a child more than ever. And I traveled alone and I sat in my vulnerability and I wrote the book. And that year um, of listening to my fears and not letting them dictate the actions I would take really just put me on a whole new trajectory. That was the year that I met my husband. That was the year that I left Brooklyn and moved to Nashville to live in a different part of the country. I had never left the East Coast. That was the year I started working for myself and was able to spend all of my time in a meaningful way. And now so much has changed since that year, but it really was the year was the year that brought me to myself, I would say.
Yeah. And so when you were on the circuit for Create Your Own Calm, this was when you were trying like a farm style life in
Yeah,
Nashville, right? And you were
yeah,
like learning how to grow your own food and I believe
yeah,
animals. And
yeah.
how was that? Did you enjoy that?
It was a really, really big and difficult adventure. Because we bought a farm on 20 acres right outside Nashville, and we were really excited. And my husband is from Texas, and he's really, like he really spearheaded everything. He's so good with animals, he's so good with the land. He really wanted to take a neglected piece of land and help it become fruitful again. And we had a huge greenhouse that we set up, and we grew our own food. We had an orchard, we had a coop of chickens. He built the coop, and we had fresh eggs every day. And it was so different because I'm such a city girl. And I grew up in the suburbs of New York City, and then I lived in New York City until I met him. And it was so different for me. It was a really big adjustment. And I will say we found a lot of joy and a lot of validation and meaning in what we were doing. But we had a we got married on the farm also, which was incredible to get married at our home, on our own land. But after that, it was the pandemic. And then we had the baby, our first child, during the pandemic on the farm also. And it was a new sense of isolation. We had nobody, we wouldn't see anybody ever. We don't live on, it wasn't on the road. Our driveway was about half a mile, three-quarters of a mile long. So we really didn't see anybody for a year and a half every single day. And we couldn't have help with the baby because of COVID, and we were really scared. I had a tough time being a first time new mom and feeling, it's already an isolating time for a new mother. And then on top of that, to not be able to have friends come by or my family or anybody. I think it was a hard time for us. And maybe if those hadn't been the circumstances, if the pandemic hadn't happened, um, maybe we would still be there. But I found myself really, really missing community and really missing the buzz of city life. And about 3 months after I gave birth, my husband really encouraged me to apply to a graduate program that I had been looking at in St. Louis. And I did. And I was accepted, and I was also awarded a fellowship to pursue my MFA in illustration and storytelling with a full ride. And we decided it was too good to be true. And so we sold the farm, and we packed up the baby and we moved to St. Louis when she was 8 months old. And now we've been here for almost 2 years, and I am going to have my second child next month. And then 2 weeks later, I will go back to school to defend my thesis and hopefully graduate. And so it's been another couple of blurry, fast-paced years for us.
Wow. Yeah, that's wild. Well, congratulations on the full ride. That's so
Thank
well deserved. And I'm so excited to see what comes next out of that. That's so exciting. And
you.
so as I was preparing for this, I was remembering when you were talking with Rosie about how what it was like to be an artist, an illustrator, a writer during your first birth, because she asked you something like, how was the creativity flow? How was the creativity throughout your pregnancy? And I
Yeah.
remember you saying something like, it's just gone. It's out the window. I'm exhausted. And so second time around, I was curious to know if anything feels different, if, how people say like, oh, this child is so different than the other one. This pregnancy
Yeah.
is different than the other one. Just
Yeah.
to hear what this one's been like for you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question for me personally because it's forcing me to reflect on the differences between the two. I will say my first pregnancy with Nadi, my daughter, was really hard. It was really hard because for me, I just had constant nausea for the first 7 months of the pregnancy, which is a really long time to be vomiting every day. So that was really hard for me physically. But I think emotionally, it was a lot harder because it was my first pregnancy. I was very anxious. And because of COVID, I was very isolated. And so I think I was very in my head and unable to find distraction or reprieve from what I think are very common and natural anxieties for first time mothers. And the second time has also been hard physically. Like I, my pregnancies are just difficult for whatever reason. So although the nausea was the same and stayed for the same amount of time, and I have a toddler this time around, and I'm in grad school and I'm in working, it has felt emotionally very different. Like I know that there's an end and I trust that it will pass. And I think more importantly, emotionally, I feel a bit more stable because I have community. I'm not isolated. I am in an atmosphere every day where I'm interacting with people. I have homework, I have projects that are keeping me busy. And creatively, the past 2 years of grad school have forced me to work through my anxiety of, as an artist, I mean, of not being good enough or not feeling skilled or talented or being afraid to let myself down. I cycled through all of those emotions the first year of grad school. And now in my second year, I feel like, okay, like you work through those, they're all natural feelings, but the only thing that is going to get you to where you want to be is working at it diligently. And that means being awful until you're not, and being bad at something until you're not. And if you really want it that badly, then you have to keep showing up and you have to keep doing the work. And you have to be okay with the fact that, most people aren't able to just pick up a new skill or medium or whatever it is, just like that and be good at it. They have to work at it. And there is, like you're saying, you see talented or successful people and you think it comes naturally to them, or you think, they got lucky or they were, born with this skill. It's innate. But I think the truth of it is the only thing that separates those people from everybody else is that they choose to keep going and they don't give up. And I think that's the only difference. And so I feel really comforted by that knowledge now. And I feel less, I'm not putting pressure on myself to reach any goal within a certain amount of time. Rather, I'm telling myself, if you keep working at it, like it'll happen one day. And I feel at peace with that now.
I love that answer. I was literally just going to ask you what advice you would give to, somebody in college who's, or even pre-college, high school, thinking, I love to draw. It brings me so much joy, or I love to write. It's just, what if I could spend my life doing that? And then oftentimes we poo-poo the idea because we think I'll never make a living. I did this to myself. I talk about it all the time on this podcast. I'll never make it as a writer because a writer's life is miserable, and I'll end up as an alcoholic or something. I don't know where this story, this cultural narrative about like how an artist's life is misery like
Right.
really took hold within me. So I love what you're saying about this. And I guess what I'm wondering, and you really did answer the question, but I wondered if you wanted to add on to anything in terms of like that young person's perspective of, I want this life as an artist, but it feels so out of reach. It feels like this, I don't know, like how could I ever make it in that world when there's so many other artists, there's so much competition. Like why me?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great question. I think the self-doubt and the feeling of discouragement, and, I tell my husband all the time because the books I make that have helped so many, millions of people and have encouraged them to continue with their lives, I wrote them, and I'm someone who feels discouraged every day. I'm not a person who walks around feeling completely balanced or grounded or like like an inspiration. That's not how I feel. Um, I feel very discouraged a lot of the time. I feel like things take a long time. I feel not good enough. I feel like I'll never get to where I want to go. But at the end of the day, I always, always, always choose to keep going. And I think more importantly, I choose to keep going, yes, but I want it badly enough that there is something inside me that doesn't let me give up. And every time I think about it, I do think about it. I'm like, I could get another 9 to 5. I could not worry about getting more clients. I could not worry about paying for my own healthcare, especially with children, like all the financial realities of working for yourself. It can be very difficult and overwhelming. And I do tell myself, like I have another choice if I don't want to do this life anymore. But I always come back to, I love this life. And even if it's harder than another life, like this is the one I choose because this is the one that allows me to be the person I really feel I am inside. And so I think that if that is what you're coming back to, that's the internal guidance you need to keep going. And I do think that some people like the idea of an artist's life or a writer's life, but they don't like the reality of it. And that's okay. You don't have to, right? But I think that if you're going to get through the isolation, the loneliness, the self-doubt, the discouragement, all the tough parts about not only working for yourself, but having that artist, writer, creative brain, which can be simultaneously so encouraging and beautiful and what separates you from everyone, but also like really daunting and self-critical and almost like harmful in some ways, that that internal spark is what's going to get you through it. And it's important that you care for it and that you pay attention to it and that you do things that helps your inner creativity thrive so that you can get through those harder and tougher parts of creative life.
Yeah, thank you. As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about, is right now, is your home studio the place of work where you create your
Yeah.
books?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about, so many of us have made that transition to home offices, and I'm curious, well, this is kind of a multifaceted question, but becoming a mother of two, balancing that, having your work be at home, balancing that sacred time that you carve out for yourself in whichever way you carve it out. And actually, I'd love to hear about your daily kind of habits and behaviors around your work schedule and how you do balance that with your family, and also how you stay motivated to work at home when it's so easy. Like I work at home too. It's so when the pandemic started and I shifted everything home, it was so easy for me to be like, oh, well, I could do laundry right now. I could bake a batch of cookies. I could take the dog for a walk. And then literally the day is gone and I have done zero work. So I'd love to hear your experience with this, how you balance it, what that kind of daily setup looks like for you.
Um, I will say when the baby first came, it was a mess. Because it was just me and my husband, and we couldn't have any help because of COVID. We were just too scared to risk it. So it was me and him taking shifts with the baby, and whoever was off duty would work for a couple hours, and then we would switch and so on. And it was absolutely exhausting. And it continued that way until we moved to St. Louis. And I actually he had to take a step back. We both worked from home, but he had to really take a step back and work a lot at night because I started school. And so I had to physically be at school. And so he would be with the baby and then have to work when I got home and catch up on everything. And then when my daughter was 1 year old, she finally was accepted into daycare. We were on the list for like 8 months. So she went to school or daycare, and that became a little bit easier because we would drop her off. I would go to school. He would work. We would pick her up, have a couple hours together as a family. And then I had to do all of my schoolwork and all of my work at night because my whole day I'm sitting in class. So that was better, but also exhausting. But I think probably the reality for a lot of people who attend grad school while also working. And there's no other parents in my class. I wish there were, because that is like a whole different part of my grad school experience is so different from my classmates. But as Nadi has gotten older, it's become a lot better. And now she goes to a school she's there from like 8:30 to 3. And so we drop her off and I either go to class or I'm in my studio at home and I work, and I'm just like totally regimented. I don't do anything. Like the house is a mess. It's not clean, and I don't cook, and I don't do anything else. I do my schoolwork and I do my actual work, and that's all I have time for right now. And in May, well, the baby will come next month, but then I'll graduate in May. And I am this time taking maternity leave. I did not do that last time. When Nadi was born, I was writing this book. So I had huge deadlines and I didn't sleep. And I didn't, I was with her, but I don't feel like I was really present. I was always thinking about, when do I get to work? When do I get to go to my work? When do I get to go to my work? And this time I feel like I need to give myself a break. And I'm taking a step back from work, and I'm going to be with the baby and my daughter. And I think when I feel ready, I will slowly start integrating work back into my life. But I really neglected myself the first time for my work because I didn't want to lose this thing, my first child that I had worked so hard to build this career and to support myself and to do this thing that I never, ever, ever thought I'd be able to do. And it felt like letting myself down to say, like, I'm going to stop working now because I have a child. And I think that when you work for yourself and you do something you love and that holds so much meaning and personal validation for yourself and that you enjoy and that gives you life, like, it's very different from taking a step back from a job where you're doing it, for the paycheck. Because I felt like I would be giving up on me and letting myself go. And this time I feel differently because I think I feel more confident that I trust myself more. I know that I will keep my career going. And I, I realized, I guess, that while I didn't neglect the maybe creative or business side of me, I neglected my physical self, my mental self, my emotional self. And this time around, I want to give more space for those parts and to focus on my health and my recovery and feeling good about myself postpartum, knowing that the creative side and the work side can only exist if those other parts do. So
Oh,
paying a little bit more attention to my health this time.
yeah. I so resonate with that idea though, that like you work so hard, you're starting to gain this momentum, you're starting to get these opportunities that it's so hard to say no to. And there's like almost this fear of, if I say no to this, then what if I miss my opportunity for that, big break, quote unquote, big break, whatever that means for us. But really and truly, I think it's so important to honor that time of rest and the time to recover, and the time, I think that's when, like all of these ideas start to come in.
Yeah.
I've heard so many artists talk about that, like this idea of letting yourself be bored, letting yourself have free space to just do nothing and allow your mind to kind of wander.
Yeah.
So I commend you
I
for that.
agree. I'm actually like really, really excited about that. And I talked to a girlfriend maybe a year ago and I told her I was really worried. I was like, what if I have another kid and I worked so hard to get to grad school and then my grad school experience will be compromised because, what if the pregnancy is hard again? Just like thinking about all the planning and do I want to have a million things happening at once? Because life has felt that way, that it's like, always a million big things at once. And I like to focus on one thing at a time. I'm very type A in that regard. And she was like, what if, yeah, what if you get pregnant during grad school and it's really hard? Like, yeah, it'll be hard, but it'll be hard either way, whether you're in grad school or not. And you get through it because you'll get through it. And then she said, you have the baby and yeah, what if you do disappear for a little bit? Like, what if that is what happens? And she said, what if you do just like rest and disappear and go quiet? And it's in that time that this new artist that you've been working towards becoming like really has a chance to like bloom and like start to take shape. And then when the baby is a little bit older and you're ready to get back into work full time, like you have all of these ideas and inspiration and new ways of being that you've cultivated during that rest period, which, to be honest, won't happen if you don't ever take a rest period or if you don't give yourself space for new things to grow and form and take shape. So I've let those words, that was like a really big, that forced me to see things differently, that conversation with her. And it has given me a lot of comfort during this, overwhelming year. And as I prepare to take a step back from everything, I feel really comforted by it. And I feel like it is going to be a year of like amazing inner growth. And I don't even know what creative things are going to come to me during this year where I step back, and that feels really exciting to not even know. Like I'm going to be surprised, and that feels awesome.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. This has me thinking about like different seasons of our lives that we go through. I mean, you're right now in this gestation period where you're going to head into maybe like a season of quiet and recuperation and just like nesting with your family, which is so beautiful. And it really relates to this book you have coming out, How It Feels to Find Yourself. navigating life's changes with purpose, clarity, and heart. And I really love, right now, I'm just kind of like rereading this section on, well, in particular, I have the book open to page 95, what it feels like to care for my parents. And I've been going through this in a really big way lately. This spring, my mom, she fell and fractured her jaw in 2 places. It actually happened on my birthday. And so it was such an interesting perspective to spend my birthday in the hospital with my mom, with her fractured jaw, and just kind of like feel like, okay, well, this is what it's going to be like. You know, you say, I love what you say here in this, the top of page 95. At some point in our lives, we stop seeing our parents solely as caregivers and more as individuals, people like us with their own collections of dreams, disappointments, anxieties, and needs. We enter a gray area and in between place where consideration for our parents begins to affect the decisions we make. And then you go on to say it's impossible to prepare for this transition because you don't know when it will happen. And that's where I was like, oh my God, this is actually happening to me right now. And it's such a weird, I always think of this line from the Indigo Girls, which is one of my favorite bands. And there's just this little line, I can't remember what song it is, but when you feel the tables turn, and that's exactly what it felt like. It's like, okay, I'm no longer a child. Now I'm my parents' caregiver, and I have to figure out how to do this. Luckily, I have a supportive sister. My father's very supportive of it. We're trying to figure this out together as a family, but it's so like, wow, our lives are changing. You know, we're entering this different season of our life. Clumsy, am I doing this right? Do they feel safe and cared for? And just all of these really poignant questions you ask in this section of the book, and the whole book actually. But I was curious if you could tell me a little bit about the impetus of this book in particular. You know, you don't have to speak to that chapter, that section that I was just talking to, but where did the inspiration for this book come from?
I would say like the guiding foundation for all of my work is wanting people to feel connected to themselves so that they aren't floundering when it comes to decision making about the relationships they choose to be in, the friendships they choose to keep, the career goals that they set for themselves, all of these things. There's a lot of, I think, uncertainty in life, of course, but also within people. And I really want people to feel confident in who they are, and I want them to know who they are, because I think that is the core of being able to be a healthy person. When you know who you are, you know what your boundaries are, you can accept another person into your life without compromising yourself. You can give yourself to your work without letting it govern you. You can learn how to say no to toxic behaviors, both self-initiated and if you find yourself in a toxic environment with people, you know, in the workplace or in your friendship or in your relationship or anywhere. So this book really came from, I think, my own big life transitions, getting married and moving onto a farm from, you know, for a city girl, things like that, things that I think in a lot of ways I thought would be only beautiful and not also difficult. And I think the truth of life is that the beautiful things in life are usually also the most difficult. And I feel okay with that. I feel that makes sense to me. But the purpose of this book is to help other people understand that also. that just because something is difficult or hard, that doesn't make it any less beautiful or meaningful or not worth having. You know, just because your relationship is really difficult and requires lots of effort, that doesn't mean it's not healthy. That doesn't mean, you know, you should give up on it. Just because, like we were just talking about, like pursuing your creativity, trying to make the life you imagined happen for yourself, like just because it's grueling and it's not falling into place and you don't feel like any doors are open to you, that doesn't mean it's not worth going after and pursuing. And so this book, the foundation of it is to help people understand that the entire spectrum of human emotion is valid. Sadness, difficulty, loneliness, anger, depression, like these are all feelings that teach us things, teach us how to be with ourselves, teach us what we want and don't want out of life and other people, and becoming comfortable with them and choosing to um, not chase happiness, which is temporary and externally based, but instead choosing to cultivate joy, which can live inside you and can be found even when you're grappling with your parents' health or how to care for them or what to do next. You can still cultivate that sense of purpose and joy and confidence inside yourself. Um, that is, I think, the healthier and more, how do I say, not wholesome, but it's a, that is what makes life whole. Like the good and the bad, the sad, the joyful, all of it. And so I think this book I wrote just to encourage people to kind of see how life is made up of a lot of balances and duality. And that, you know, we hear it all the time, but most of life is in that gray area, 99% of it, in the in between, in the uncertainty, in the unknown, where we just don't know what's going to happen next. And I know that feels so unnerving and scary, but learning to feel confident in that area, in that gray space, learning how to listen to yourself, to hear yourself, to kind of quiet everybody else's voice. I think that is the key to being able to navigate big life transitions, and the key to making decisions that reflect who you are and that will get you closer to that life that you want for yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful, Meera.
I feel like I rambled a little bit.
No, I love it. I could listen to you ramble all day. Really, truly. So is there, I'm curious if there's like any last thing that any question that I didn't ask you that you were hoping to speak to, or any, key takeaway from this book or any of your books. I mean, you really did just kind of sum it up very nicely, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to put the cherry on the top before we say goodbye.
I think I just wanted to tell you one of my favorite essays in the book is the last one, which is How to Keep Going. And it really speaks to the kind of the drudgery of life, the times where you're doing the dishes for the 500th time and you're like, oh my goodness, like, do I have to do dishes every day for the rest of my life? And thinking about like something that came from COVID is everyone's like sick of cooking and thinking about what to eat and all of that. Like just that like the monotony where you're like, I want to feel creative and inspired. And instead I'm doing laundry again and I'm cooking again. And I have to take the dog out again. And that essay is my favorite because I think it speaks to how to find joy and purpose in those small monotonous moments in life, and how a simple phone call with a loved one can kind of turn your day around, or how feeling connected to the earth when you go for a walk can lift your mood and make you see things differently, and how that that small shift in perspective, similar to how we were talking about, like, where do you find inspiration? Once you start practicing it, you can reach for and activate those small shifts in perspective more and more frequently and with ease, and it doesn't feel like work. And so I just wanted to point out that essay, and that I hope it'll be helpful for people. And it helped me while I was writing it.
Yeah. Oh, Meera, thank you so much. I want to point out to listeners that you do have a beautiful, another thing I could do is sit and stare at your Instagram grid all day. Gorgeous. It's full of all of your artwork. And then I just discovered you have Substack, which generates a weekly email, I think, right? Or weekly newsletter. And so will you just quickly tell us what those handles are? I'll make sure they go in the show notes, but I always like to hear it in the author's own words.
My Instagram is at Meera Lee Patel, and my Substack is also meeraleepatel.substack.com. And my Substack newsletter is actually called Dear Somebody, and I send it out most Fridays. And it is a short note that chronicles 5 things that I want to remember from each week. So it's usually a personal moment from my week that I really don't want to forget, along with creative inspiration, reflections on motherhood and parenthood, and things that kind of fuel me and encourage me to keep making and keep putting myself out into the world and connecting with other people, and kind of living in the most genuine and connective way I can.
Thank you so much for this work. I'm so grateful you're here in this world and sharing it with us. And I'm so excited to see what you do next. Definitely give yourself that rest. I'm so glad to hear that you're doing that, and I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure, Meera. Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you. Everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't, be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.